Major League Soccer stifles controversy to its detriment. Mexico is talking pro rel again. We've got U.S. women's national team roster to get into and a lot more. Here, it's Morning Kick Around on a Wednesday. As you can see, Jason Davis all by my lonesome. Robert Kerr is off covering the world of lower division soccer in Michigan. Intrepid Robert Kerr on a bus, I think, right now. Hopefully, we'll hear about his journeys to Flint, Michigan with Oakland County SC, his beloved local soccer team. But we do have a good show for you today on a Wednesday. Very excited to talk to Alexander Abnos about Major League Soccer's inability to accept controversy as a way to build interest. You might have seen Lionel Messi upset about a call in the last game for Inter Miami, another loss. And Alexander Abnos has thoughts on the way Major League Soccer has handled that. I'm very much looking forward to that. Before we dive into what's on today's docket, why don't I tell you that you can support the show, Morning Kick Around? Just subscribe. That's the first step. Subscribe to the show, to the channel, so that you know what's coming up on Morning Kick Around, so you get notified. If you missed the live show, well, obviously those are there for you to go back and watch, but we also put the segments up for you to watch in smaller chunks. That's a great way. You can also become a member on YouTube. You get access to certain perks, priority commenting, the Discord, which is an ongoing conversation. So we've got a bunch of people, supporters of Morning Kick Around, soccer fans from across America who are part of that as well. Obviously, follow us on social media. We're on X, Blue Sky, other places under M Kick Around. You can see it right there on the screen. Very simple to do, helps the show. And as I have said to many times to Rob, I think the best thing for you to do, maybe if you want to throw us some money, I think Ko-fi.com is a place where you can do that too. Morning Kick Around. If you don't want to throw us any money, that's fine. Just tell somebody about Morning Kick Around. Share a segment, share a conversation that we had, some video that's up there. Let people know that we are out here, that we're doing this, that we're covering American soccer 3 times a week. And as I said, I think the incentive here is the more subscribers, the more members, the more people know about us, the closer we get to going 5 times a week here on Morning Kick Around. I would love for that to be the case. I miss talking American soccer 5 times a week. Oh my goodness, look at that. That is live impromptu. He jumped in. Nobody told you could do this, but no, I'm just kidding. Hi, Rob.
Hey, how's it going, Jason? Fresh off the bus in Flint, Michigan for a school day game, USL 2. So was on the bus with some rowdy footballers, and now I have to sit around for a couple hours in the rain until it starts.
This is our first ever live hit from a field anywhere on Morning Kicker. This is great. I feel like I'm back home in the studio, warm and dry. Let's go to our correspondent, Robert Kerr. Robert, what are conditions like out there?
After an opening day win, Oakland County FC come into Flint, Michigan for their second match, looking to build on their momentum. We have wet and cold conditions here, Jason, but it looks like it might be a nice day for some live football action.
Okay. Well, Rob, I'm glad that you are currently dry. It looks like you're not actually getting rained on at the moment. Obviously, we wish the best to Oakland County FC and all their travails, as that is your beloved team. I was watching on YouTube a little stand-up interview you did with the MVP of the opening game. So Rob's out there doing the work.
I'm out there doing the thing, and a new era for Oakland County FC, new ownership, expanded resources, and they got off to a good start on Saturday. So, support our program here, Morning Kick Around. Check out what I'm doing for Oakland County Football Club.
Yes, support Rob, support USL 2 and everything going on there. Yeah, get that hair together, Rob. You go take care of that. We're going to continue on with the show, and we'll see you on Friday.
Yeah, right? My intern squad will get me airbrushed and ready for my my national hit.
All right, perfect. There goes Rob Kerr on the road with Oakland County. Thank you very much. So we will shift back to our regularly scheduled programming here. And I think right now, what better way to follow up Rob than go straight into long balls here on Wednesday morning's Kick Around. All right, Wednesday kick around. We're going to get into the Open Cup. We had a couple of games last night. We've got games this evening, as you can see right there on your screen. The Revs fall at home. I'm going to come back to that. At home to the Chicago Fire. 3-1, big victory for Greg Berhalter and company. The Fire are a team with a pretty good U.S. Open Cup history. Of course, they won it in their very first year with Bob Bradley at the helm back in 1998. So I'm sure that Greg Berhalter would love to add to the number of trophies in the case for Chicago, and this is an opportunity to do that. A little bit of a mixed bag in terms of the rosters that these teams brought to the field. I saw that there were a number of reserves, young guys with big numbers. The number on the back is higher than, I don't know, what, 30? That you know that this is not a player who's going to get a lot of time in meaningful matches, and the Open Cup seems to be a place for that. The San Jose Earthquakes beat the Portland Timbers last night 1-0. And again, games tonight, DC United, Charlotte FC. DC in a bit of a problem in the league. Charlotte coming off a loss themselves. Minnesota United, St. Louis City. They're in Minnesota. New York Red Bulls, FC Dallas. I saw some mention of the lack of ticket sales, the lack of attendance coming for that New York Red Bulls game, rather. I think they're doing that at Red Bull Arena. Something like 2,000 people expected, which, we could talk about the way that these clubs sell or don't sell the Open Cup. And again, I mentioned I'm going to come back to the Revs being at home, quote unquote. Orlando City, Nashville, Philadelphia Union, Pittsburgh Riverhounds. There is the last lower division team left in the competition. I would imagine a lot of people that watch this show, a lot of American soccer fans, are rooting for Bob Lilly and the Pittsburgh Riverhounds in that game. Nothing against the Union. I don't have anything against the Union. The Union actually, they're a pretty likable team in most respects. They commit to developing American talent. They play really hard. They've got a vibrant fan base of their own that I think has done a lot for American soccer. But come on, who's not rooting for the underdog story? Who's not rooting for the Pittsburgh Riverhounds to spring that upset in Chester? I talked to Bob Lilly on the radio yesterday. And, I asked him, would you prefer the lower division teams to be hosting these games? Now, of course, Bob Lilly says, of course, we would love to be at home. They beat NYCFC at Highmark Field in Highmark Stadium in Pittsburgh in the last round. 96th minute winner in that game, by the way. Of course, they'd rather be at home. But, and as a rule, I mean, this is something we talk about. Should the U.S. Open Cup the format be changed so that the lower division team hosts whenever is possible? Sometimes they might not be appropriate venues at certain stages, I guess. But wouldn't you rather have these games in places like Highmark rather than in Chester, where there probably won't be a big crowd on a Wednesday night to watch Philadelphia play Pittsburgh, even though that's an in-state rivalry and should have a lot of heat to it? I mean, in a different universe, an Open Cup match between those two teams is one of the most anticipated games on the schedule. Austin FC and Houston, that's a Texas rivalry matchup. All right, so here we are. Let's come to what I was talking about with the Revs. Okay, so the New England Revolution played in Providence last night. They played at Providence College. I'm going to show you a quote. This is what head coach Caleb Porter had to say about playing the game at Providence College. He said this a couple weeks ago, I think after the last round. He said, I think it's good to branch out a bit in these Cup games. We're playing some different guys. We're developing players. Again, saying basically we're not going to play our best players at this point in the tournament, round of 16. In some ways, we're stimulating our fan base in different ways. We're developing our fan base in different markets. I think it's a positive. You look around the league, you're never going to get a packed stadium in an Open Cup game. Why, Caleb? Let's talk about why. Like, why should there not be a packed stadium for an Open Cup game? How much of this is on the clubs and a lack of marketing around these games? How much of is it an inability of these teams to commit to educating their fans about what is going on here? I understand it's midweek, and midweek is hard to sell, period. But there's no reason that these teams can't do better than they are. It's much better to be in a smaller stadium and have an intimate environment. Look, I got to actually have an image. This is from Providence College last night. Random shot, 66th minute. Chicago up a goal. How many people I can count the number of people in this picture if I wanted to. This to me, and again, this is what it is. We got an artificial surface with a big logo in the middle. No offense to Providence College. no offense to Big East lacrosse, right? The Friars are trying to get it done, and I don't know, maybe they don't have the money to throw at a big stadium. Probably don't. This frustrates me. This indicates to me a lack of respect on the part of teams like the New England Revolution when they're in this tournament. And Caleb points to the Sounders making runs at Starfire back in the day. The fans embraced it, the team embraced it. You know why? Because the Sounders had done the work to educate their fans about what the Open Cup was. And even though they played at Starfire, and, I would prefer we don't do that. Play in your regular venue, try to sell as many tickets as possible. If you need to paper the joint, if you need to give tickets away for free to get people in the building to watch the Open Cup game, I mean, come on. Why would this game between the Revs and Chicago, why does it need to be played on that? Does it not disrespect the competition at this stage to be playing in a venue like that? I'm not sure that Gillette's all that better surface-wise, but my point is it looks terrible. It looks like how can we get to a point of the Open Cup feeling like a big-time tournament if it looks like this on television? That's it. That's my little rant on the Open Cup. Not everybody is bothered by this, I'm sure. And again, across Major League Soccer, teams choose to play in smaller venues because of cost-cutting measures, right? Caleb Porter is towing the company line and saying, oh, this is a way to spread grow our fan base down to Providence. Yeah? Is that what there's Rhode Island FC, by the way, exists in Rhode Island. I'm not saying there needs to be territorial concerns here, like, oh, they can't step on the turf. I'm just saying, is that really doing any of that work that Caleb Porter suggests is happening? I'm not so sure that that's the case. All right, moving on. Long ball number 2 here on a Wednesday. The U.S. women's national team has a new roster out. Emma Hayes calling up a bunch of players to play in a couple of friendlies here. China and Jamaica, as you can see, May and June matchups. The headline, there are a couple of headlines. One of them is, and shout out to producer Jenny for pointing this out as we were getting ready today, there are, 4 caps between those 3 goalkeepers. 4. That's not a lot. That seems like very few caps for a U.S. women's national team to have at the goalkeeper position. Look, obviously there is a need to move forward and bring in new players and take a look at new players. And I think, Falantolis Joyce, who plays at Manchester United in the Super League, is getting a lot of attention for what she's been able to do in England. I don't have any problem with that, with her getting a call. And again, I don't know if I have a problem with any of this. It just does point to an issue with the changes at goalkeeper for the U.S. women's national team that Emma Hayes is kind of just mixing it up. Now, she still has 2 years before a World Cup. So maybe there is plenty of time to figure this out. And you look at the defenders, you can also see there is some experience. Obviously, Crystal Dunn has 159 caps. Emily Sonnet has 107 caps to her name. Naima Gurman comes back. That's good. That's a big highlight. Circle that. Made the big move to Chelsea, got injured, unable to really do a whole lot, finally getting back healthy. Emily Fox is there as well. She is 66 caps. But you do have Carrie Abello from Orlando has no caps. Avery Patterson, who has 2 caps. Emily Sams with lots of Emilys. We're just going to fill up the defending with Emilys. Tara McCown, some caps, has been in the group recently, so she is there. Midfielders, Sam Coffey, Lindsay Heaps. That is Lindsay Horan, if you're curious. Name change, got married. Claire Hutton, Kansas City Current. And 32-year-old, and I'm going to butcher her name. I listened to her say it about 3,000 times today. Leu Labonta. That's the closest I'm going to get. 32 years old, does not have a cap, gets called into the national team. That's an incredible story. Maybe I could find some negatives with it. Again, considering that there's a World Cup in a couple years, do you need to be blooding 32-year-old midfielders? I don't know. But you got Olivia Moultrie, very young midfielder, 5 caps, and Lily Johannes, teenager, 6 caps to her name. Those players you can definitely get excited about. You have Lynn, formerly Williams, Abiandolo, Seattle Reign, Michelle Cooper, Katarina Macario. Always good to see her, again, back in the last camp, back in this camp. She could be a major force in the World Cup in 2027. Very excited for that. Emma Sears, Racing Louisville, with 4 caps to her name. Ali Sentnor, who's made a bit of a show since she's gotten into this group. Alyssa Thompson of Angel City, very talented player, and Giselle Thompson, Angel City. This is still early enough in the process, a couple of years out from the World Cup, that, and we don't, unlike in the men's game, you're not really sweating qualification for the U.S. women's national team when it comes to a World Cup. So it's hard to know how anxious to be about any of this. And honestly, and not, I'm not trying to be disrespectful. Honestly, there really shouldn't be an issue against China or Jamaica for the U.S. women's national team. And again, that's maybe you line up these kind of friendlies where the degree of difficulty is relatively low so that you can bring in a bunch of uncapped players or players who have limited experience to their name so that they can be, again, brought into the group, get a little bit of a look. Emma Hayes can broaden out the player pool. And we do need depth. The U.S. women's national team always, just like any team, needs to find depth in that. So there are a couple of things I think we're pointing out here. And as much as it's hard for me to get anxious about this team in a way that makes me care too much about these results, seeing big wins, seeing kind of comprehensive wins in games where they are dominant and better than China and Jamaica for 90 plus minutes would obviously be advantageous moving forward into the future. The U.S. women always carrying a lot of expectations. Yeah, Claudia Dickey, Mandy McGlynn, Valentulis Joyce, 4 caps between them who will get the nod against China and Jamaica. Probably going to see one woman start one game and another goalkeeper start another game, I would guess. Naomi Girma being back is such a big deal. Such a massive part of this back line for the U.S. women moving forward. All right, so that's the U.S. women's national team. The U.S. men's national team is getting ready for the Gold Cup. And while we expect the final roster tomorrow, we didn't touch on the 60-man roster all that much here, I don't think, on Morning Kick Around. And it does have a couple of interesting names that I think some people may be circling and hoping we see in the final roster. The preliminary roster has, again, 60 players. It's a lot of players who are not going to be in the final group. So when you look at the goalkeepers, Chris Brady, Matt Freese, Diego Cochin, Patrick Schulte, Zach Steffen, Matt Turner. I think there is some sense, and I think Pochettino has even said, Matt Turner he can't expect to be the number one just because he's been the number one in the past. There's going to be a bit of a battle. Pochettino himself has said that Matt Turner's not assured of starting for the United States in the Gold Cup. He said, of course, until now, Matt was our number one choice, but that can change. In our mind, it's open for another player maybe to challenge. He said this yesterday in a Zoom news conference. Turner, again, one of 6 goalkeepers in that group. I would expect him to be in the final roster. It's tough to know if it's Schulte, Steffen, Turner, just because of the veterans and the ones that Pochettino has called, or if a Matt Freese can break his way into that group. I'm not sure. Maybe at Zach Steffen's expense. And Zach Steffen's been very good so far in 2025 for the Rapids. Maybe things have not quite held up to that initial start, but he's been much better than he was last year when people were saying that he was one of the problems for the Rapids and it didn't make any sense for him to be considered for the U.S. men's national team. With the defenders, there's some sentimental things here. Tristan Blackman, who's turned himself into a very good center back in Major League Soccer after bouncing around a bit before landing in Vancouver. I think he's a name that people might take notice of, even if they're not sure he should be in the final roster. Max Arfston, Columbus Crew, a guy that I've talked to, and he's explained that there's a significant difference between playing wingback for the Columbus Crew and fullback for the U.S. men's national team, but he's enjoying that challenge. We got Miles Robinson, and I've seen some people with projected rosters put Miles Robinson over, say, an Austin Trusty. Miles is a bigger player, a more physical player, but I think a lot of people think Austin Trusty's a better player, better player. You have Cameron Carter-Vickers and Trusty playing there at Celtic, obviously, together. Serginho Dest being back in the picture after his injury. That is certainly one of the stories here for the U.S. men's national team. How will Pochettino deploy Serginho Dest? And what will he ask of his left back if Serginho Dest is getting up and down the field the way that we expect Serginho Dest to do. Alex Freeman is getting a lot of attention. Could he be in the final 23-man roster for the U.S. men's national team? I think there is a sense he could surprise some people and make his way into that group. Done very well at Orlando this season. But again, Anthony Robinson figures to be in this team, right? There has been that question, and we discussed it, whether or not Christian Pulisic, and I think you could throw Jedi Robinson into this mix, need a break. Like, do they need a break to the point of you leave them off the Gold Cup roster, you don't bring them to this tournament, you let them recuperate over the summer, and then you reset for the fall rather, for 2025-26. But this is the last competition the U.S. will be in before the World Cup. This is the last trophy on the line, meaningful games, competitive environment. And I just find it very difficult to think that Pochettino can take this one lightly or choose not to call in some of his best players because they need a rest. Again, you may that may be a concern, but for me, that does not outweigh the need to see as the best possible team together. And we already know there's no Tim Weah. We already know there's no Weston McKennie, and we know that Giovanni Reyna is also not on the 60-man roster and therefore cannot be on the final roster, despite the fact he might not be a Borussia Dortmund player for much longer. Dortmund doesn't have to release him. And I also want to make sure that people understand that this is not down to the player's choice. These players are not being released because FIFA has said it's okay, you don't have to release them if you are in the Club World Cup. So while you could frame this as, does Weston McKennie want to play for the national team or Juventus this summer? It's not down to him. It's not as though Weston McKennie, I mean, I suppose he could go to Juventus. He could go to the leadership of Juventus and he could say, hey, you know what? I really want to play for my national team. Can you release me this summer? But that is a calculated risk for him, particularly with the changes that have been coming at Juventus or have been happening in Juventus. And obviously for Reyna, it's a matter of finding a new club. So if Dortmund wants to find a new club for him and they want him to be there, whatever it is, regardless of the reasoning, you kind of have to do what the club wants so that you have the best possible situation coming up this fall. For Weah and for McKennie, that's to be in Juventus, with Juventus this summer as much as possible, to get as much face time as they can with the leadership of Juve and the potential people that will be leading that club into the future in Turin. Because, it'd be nice to go win a Gold Cup. And I don't like devaluing our continental championship. That's again why Pulisic should go. So let's go to the chat here. You bring Pulisic to the Gold Cup and you don't start him. You play him when needed in the second half. I'm not against that, right? I'm not against that. I mean, again, you are limited in the number of games you have before the World Cup kicks off next year, and you kind of need to see the best possible team as much as possible. But if you are worried about the load for Christian Pulisic, and I suppose you could say the same thing for Jedi Robinson, then yeah, you can be strategic with this. Right, you can bring in other players to help cover for them, players that might deserve a look, or you might want to get a look for depth reasons anyway. So the defenders rather on the 60-man roster: Max Arfston, Tristan Blackman, George Campbell, Cameron Carter-Vickers, Serginho Dest, Max Dietz, Marlon Fossey, Alex Freeman, Nathan Harriel, Dewan Jones, Richie Ledesma, who has become a fullback at PSV, Christopher Lund, Mark McKenzie, Shaq Moore, Tim Ream. Tim Ream is probably still in the picture. I kind of don't love him taking up a spot. I don't think the move to Charlotte has necessarily made him. I don't think it's done a whole lot for my confidence that he's a World Cup player next year at his age. After Tim Ream, Chris Richards, Jedi Robinson, Miles Robinson, Joe Scally, definitely in the team. John Tolkien, who could be the left back you turn to, Austin Trusty, Caleb Wiley also there, and Walker Zimmerman. And again, you kind of look at projected rosters, you kind of think about what this back line needs to look like. Richards figures to be there. Again, I think, Tim Ream is maybe a bubble player. I have him in only because I think Pochettino values his experience and his leadership. But you have Cameron Carter-Vickers, Mark McKenzie as well. I think McKenzie's in. Dest, if he takes up a spot, what does that mean? Joe Scally, his backup, Jedi Robinson, and who's the left back? Is it John Tolkien? Is it Caleb Wiley? What does that look like? But that's the back line. In terms of the midfield, Brendan Aronson, Paxton Aronson, Tyler Adams, Sebastian Berhalter. Berhalter's one of those guys that people are talking about, maybe needs a look. Been really good for Vancouver so far this year. One major reason why Vancouver has been this good is Sebastian Berhalter. Gianluca Busio, Johnny Cardoso, Caden Clark. Can't see that happening, but he's there. Luca Della Torre, San Diego FC, has drifted away from the national team picture. Injury first there at Celta Vigo, and then the move to San Diego. Diego Luna. We all want to see Diego Luna in this team, don't we? Now, again, how he plays and what role Pochettino envisions for him is interesting, but I definitely think that no Giovanni Reyna opens the door for Diego Luna, who has been, for RSL, much more of a goal scorer than a facilitator, which I don't know how that plays into Pochettino's thinking. You have Matko Milic, who made a bit of a wave and a bit of a splash in January. We know his story. Got banned by MLS because he got into a fight with an amateur. Anyway, Aiden Morris, who I like a lot, but maybe isn't there in terms of his ability yet. Yunus Musa, Quinn Sullivan, Tanner Tessman, Timothy Tillman, Malik Tillman, Indiana Vasilev. Look at that Philadelphia Union representation. And Sean Zawatsky. There are some holes there. I mean, Musa has just dropped off a cliff, I think, in terms of confidence and our expectations for him, but I'm not sure there's a better option in this midfield than Yunus Musa when you look at this group, right? Aiden Morris, is he in this team? Tyler Adams is definitely in this team. Johnny Cardoso in this team. What kind of roles are we talking about here? How many eights do you need versus how many sixes do you need? You just need 2 6s. Okay, well, is that Tyler Adams, and then who's backing him up? Is it Yunus Musa or is it Johnny Cardoso? I think is a question. And in the forward position, again, I'm bringing Pulisic if it's my team. You've got Damian Downs, who's on the 60-man list, and that is certainly something people have circled. He's at FC Cologne in Germany. He has he's 20 years old, so he's a very young player. He's a dual national, a German dual national. Typically, and I've talked about this a lot in my career, typically when we're talking about sort of the power dynamics of dual nationals, you always bet on the team that is more successful historically, that has a better chance of winning things, that is certainly more prestigious to play for. And that's Germany. I mean, we don't have to feel bad about that. That's Germany. And if Damian Downs still holds out hope that he can play for Germany, he may not accept a call up to the U.S. men's national team for the Gold Cup. I would love to see it. I do think we need more forward options. When you think about whether or not a guy like Josh Sargent can get it done at international level, as good as he's been for Norwich, it never seems to come together. Haji Wright can score, can do things at Coventry City, but is he a guy we want to trust at the U.S. men's national team level? I think those things are certainly up in the air right now. Andrew Johnson, Sebi, Aiden, Zawatsky midfield. All right. Yeah, I'm sure everybody will be on board with that one. Yeah, nobody will have a problem with that. The entirely, well, Aiden Morris is not an MLS player anymore, but he was there. He certainly was. In terms of rest, this is comment from Chris. I'm not going to say your name. I don't know how to say that. You let them take a break over the summer. Their clubs will just use up the extra reserves. All right. I mean, again, there are a couple of different competing elements to this, and I just don't know if there's a simple answer to that problem. And we saw Pochettino very early in his tenure let Weston McKennie and Christian Pulisic leave to go back to Germany, to Europe rather, back to Italy, when the U.S. went down to Guadalajara to play Mexico. And that result left a bad taste in my mouth because it was Mexico, because it was tough to see the U.S. not play well against Mexico, or choose a path that was going to make it more difficult to beat Mexico. And I just think at this point, again, if I had more confidence that Pochettino had a grasp on how to get this team playing well, I wouldn't be so intent on Christian Pulisic being in this lineup. I would be okay maybe with a little bit more of a break situation. I would say this is a guy who has given a lot. You know what you're going to get out of him for the most part in terms of his individual performance. but there is some question about whether or not he works within the team dynamic that Pochettino is trying to form. All right, I see our guest has arrived, so we're going to get ready to talk a little bit about the Major League Soccer and the way Major League Soccer, I guess, covers itself or allows certain stories to get out there in the media sphere. You may have seen Lionel Messi upset about a back pass that wasn't given in the last Inter Miami game that has sparked a conversation. Alexander Abnos of The Guardian has written on it. We're going to talk about that. But before I get to Alex, let me ask you to subscribe to the show, become a member of Morning Kick Around on YouTube. That'll help out the show. You can just throw a little bit of money our way to keep us going, maybe help us get to 5 days a week. We also have the ability to give us a little bit of money on Ko-Fi as well. If you want to help support the show there, you can follow us on social media at Emma Kick Around, Instagram, Blue Sky, and the like. Okay, without further ado, I think we're going to shift our attention back to Major League Soccer, back to media and questions around MLS and how it's covered. Alexander Abnos from The Guardian when we come back. All right, there he is, Alexander Abnos, whose story, Messi's ires free publicity for MLS, so why is the league editing it out? That's a tough word to say fast. Got me thinking. Alexander, welcome to the show. Thank you for coming on.
How's it going, Jason? Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I'm going to throw up the headline here so people can see what I'm talking about, what Alexander wrote on at The Guardian. So I guess the background is important, right, Alexander? This is all about a back pass gone awry and an interview that Lionel Messi felt it felt necessary to give Michele Giannoni afterwards.
Yeah, so that's the sort of root thing that happened. But the thing that made me actually write this column and that got me all sort of worked up on a Monday, basically, was that I went back to watch the highlight of this particular play. This is, there was a back pass it wasn't a back pass. There was a play that Lionel Messi thought that was a back pass that led immediately to a goal by Orlando City. And so I went back to try to watch that goal. And the YouTube highlight of this thing is hilarious. It starts with Luis Muriel. Like, there's a whole play that, Pedro Gallese launches the ball downfield, a really great long range pass, really. And Luis Muriel has to carry the ball quite a long ways. He's basically one-on-one with the keeper. I think he has like one defender trailing him, and he finishes, and Orlando goes up 1-0. Very big moment in the game. And it starts with Luis Muriel probably like 10 yards from goal, 10 yards from the goalkeeper. And it just completely cuts out the entire origin of the play. And this is not necessarily something that's new for soccer highlights and MLS highlights. But in this particular case, you had the commentators talking about.
Oh, frozen Alexander. There he is. Sorry.
Sorry.
You froze just a second, but yeah, you were talking about the commentators involved in this.
Yeah. The commentators were talking about it. Messi was complaining, and they just never showed the origin of the play. And I thought that was, it just got me, between that and the fact that Messi gave this interview talking about how referees need to be looked at by MLS, that was initially tweeted and then deleted and then tweeted again without those things. It just became clear that they were trying to, bury this moment one way or another. And
well, let's be clear here. I think you and I have been around a while, and people who cover Major League Soccer know that this is not new. And really, let's make sure it's clear as well that MLS isn't alone in trying to control messaging, right?
Absolutely not.
Every individual club has been doing it since the league began. But the league itself also has been very conscious of its messaging. It's just now that the media ecosphere around Major League Soccer has shrunk to such a small level because they've paywalled the league essentially, right? And because and maybe we can talk about whether you think the Apple deal has exacerbated a problem that already existed or if it created a problem. Because I can tell you that, as a veteran of American soccer media, things have kind of consolidated around sort of big media organizations, but then those organizations now don't have rights to broadcast MLS in most respects, so they now have less incentive to cover the league outside of maybe a broadcast that trickles over to a Fox or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, listen, the reason I wrote about this, and I think what I've thought about as I've been reading some of the reactions to the column, the reason I found this to be so interesting is that it's kind of the perfect encapsulation of what happens when you have a moment like this that doesn't necessarily make the league look amazing. Um, and for what it's worth, I don't actually blame MLS all that much for doing what they did. They have a policy where they can't have criticism of the league on their own platforms. I think that's a perfectly sensible policy to have if you're MLS. You don't want people on the MLS Twitter account calling MLS bad in any
Right.
way. So like I get it. There's a perfectly reasonable explanation for that. I just think that, they're trading the ability to talk about moments like that for that policy for the Apple deal, which enables them to broadcast games the way they've been able
Right.
to broadcast games.
Look, again, we've got some comments in here. Okay, I'm gonna
Sure.
throw some of these up.
Please do.
Thomas saying, why would an editor editing a highlight film for an American audience put in highlights of players complaining? That you've made that point, right? That's you're right. That doesn't make any sense intuitively. Like, why would you put Lionel Messi? Now, again, if the entire sequence sort of involves this moment where Messi kind of touches the ball, it touches an Orlando player, there's sort of confusion, but it all kind of leads to Muriel's goal. I could see justifying that, even if it does look like Messi is complaining.
Yeah.
Point about the collective editing. But my issue here largely is that if MLS was like most big time American sports leagues, like the NBA, the NFL, Major League Baseball, even hockey to an extent, you could rely on a media engine outside of the league's auspices to cover this, to talk about it, to make it into a thing. Now, this is also kind of like, oh, well, soccer's not really big yet. But that's the point, because Major League Soccer doesn't have the advantages the NFL does with 24-hour wall-to-wall coverage of their product, regardless, good or bad, which benefits the NFL. The NFL doesn't have to say, we're going to highlight the bad stuff. Somebody else will highlight that, but it brings up the drama. It jacks up everybody's interest in what's going to happen next. And now you have that conversation around the league. And MLS lacks that. So I think more than sort of who's at fault here, Alexander, it's to me the issue of MLS lacks this thing that most leagues can rely on, and I don't know what the answer is to getting it going.
Yeah, I mean, this is like I really don't mean to like I know I wrote a whole column about it, but I don't mean to harp on this one call. Like I think that this is ultimately one small symptom of a larger problem, as you correctly point out. I mean, I would also point out that MLS is the only league that is producing, not just like offering for broadcast, but producing the production of every single one of their games.
Right.
They're the only league that does this. NFL doesn't do that. NBA doesn't do it. MLB doesn't do it. NHL doesn't do it. The Premier League and the top five European leagues, they do it to a certain extent, but it's not as if they're building programming and assigning announcers and like sending that everywhere. They do have like a world feed, but it's not, it's just a different sort of thing than building an entire media ecosystem basically from nothing. I think they
Right.
deserve a lot of credit for doing that. And I think by and large, they do a great job of covering the league. But I just think that you run into these moments where it's going to run up against MLS policy, and that just creates,
Right. Right. You're
a
boxed
shortage
in.
of coverage.
You're boxed in, and
Yeah,
it again, you sort of lament, this is the thing. We're lamenting the fact there's not more coverage, but I guess this is where the questioning is. Does MLS have the right approach? Are they thinking about this in the right way strategically when everything is kind of becoming an in-house product? And you mentioned those other leagues don't broadcast, don't produce their own they want to. They certainly
I
want
would
to
love
do
to.
the
Yeah,
same thing Major League Soccer is doing, but they don't. And again, because of the history that's behind them that pushes them forward, they don't necessarily have to worry, well, if we produce our own stuff, nobody will talk about our controversial moments. People will. Will do that because there's so much invested locally in coverage. Now, people are pointing out U.S. men's national team total football. MLS is a global audience. How do you think that relates to this story, this question? Because obviously, with Lionel Messi, we're talking about a global superstar who's here in Major League Soccer, supposed to put wind in the sails of the league, not just in the U.S., but around the world. The interview he gives to Michele Giannoni is in Spanish, right? He's speaking his native language, which is a global language, more
hmm
Spanish speakers natively than English speakers on the planet, Alexander. So, how does that tie into the way MLS is doing this?
Well, I think that's really the key for this whole situation, and part of the reason why it's worth talking about, I think, is because I think if Messi hadn't talked to Michele after the game, we wouldn't be sitting here talking about this. I would have never written this column because he talks so rarely. This is not somebody that is out there on a microphone all the time, really going out of his way to sell the league in the way a lot of other past DPs have. Now, does he necessarily have to do that? No, he hasn't. He's an amazing player that does amazing things on a regular basis. I think that's enough. That's fine. But it does create the effect that when he does talk and when he does say things, it really matters. And like the criticism that he offered is a relatively measured criticism. It's not like he's going off. He's not on some sort of a rant. He's saying, listen, I thought that was a strange situation. I thought it was a back pass. We suffered some other calls in the previous game that I didn't agree with either. I think MLS should look at the referees. A lot of other players have said this. A lot of other coaches have said this. I grew up watching Kansas City Wizards, Sporting Kansas City. Peter Vermes did this on a weekly basis, but Peter Vermes is not somebody that has the same kind of global reach as Lionel Messi. When he says stuff, it matters. And I think that the fact that he said this and that they're then not only cutting off that part of the interview from what they tweeted, but also cutting off the very part of the play that he's talking about. It's just denying the reality of the situation and denying the reality of what happened in your league and preventing people the opportunity to talk about it in an informed way and in a way that might actually create some momentum and buzz around the league.
I also think
and
that we're in this moment, Alexander, where people are consuming sports in little bite-sized pieces via highlights, via moments. Not, I'm watching full games, but I'm not watching every full game on an MLS weekend. There's 15 of them. Nobody can possibly do that. So why wouldn't you, again, want to give a fuller picture, right? You can talk about, well, that makes the league look bad and why wouldn't the league do that, but I do think that maybe the default policy should be, let's give the full picture, because we know people are, and again, this is also about the paywall and how these highlights are being distributed, because if they were happening on, say, ESPN or Fox or any other sort of traditional linear television network, it wouldn't be up to MLS to share it
right.
that way.
Yeah. And I should say also that it's not as if, like, I acknowledge, by the way, that MLS has a series on YouTube called Instant Replay, where Andrew Wiebe does a great job going through all these controversial calls and saying whether or not it was right or wrong. I think it's great that they do that. I think there's also a pretty big difference between having that show that I believe only exists on YouTube and having a discussion point on the primary media partner of MLS before and after the game, involving the biggest player, still maybe the most famous player in the world, certainly the most famous in the league. So it's not as if I really don't want to create the impression that I think that there's some like grand conspiracy to like obscure anything that's bad about MLS. I think they're willing to talk about calls at times. They're willing to talk about referees at times. But I just think that there's a limit to how much they can do it, and especially in the case of Messi, what they're able to show and what they're willing to show. And that may be just be the price that they're willing to pay, and the price that we have to pay as soccer watchers in the US, because Apple offered them the best broadcast deal. And
Okay.
it is a very good broadcast deal. Like, the
I'm
games
gonna
look amazing.
I'm gonna try to pull together some threads here and some thinking, right? Because
Sure.
again, this is a bit of a hobby horse for me, which is why I asked Alexander to come on the show, because I've been, like like a lot of people, I've been trying to make soccer my life, American soccer my life, right? And I've been lucky enough, and whatever, showing a little bit of talent here or there, to have a job in soccer, to be able to do something like this on a Wednesday morning instead of going into an office and punching numbers into a computer, which I guess everybody's being replaced by AI anyway. But my point is, like, I at my nature, I want American soccer to be bigger, to be more interesting, to capture more attention. I'm not sure why, Alexander. Sometimes I get into this Inception kind of conversation in my head. Why do I
You and
care?
me both, dude.
MLS is not going anywhere, right? I know MLS is going to happen next year. Should that be enough? Or am I do I need the game to be bigger to validate my interest in the sport? Who knows? But I think we all have this sense, right? We're all kind of boosters of American soccer. And when you watch any television based around sports, or listen to any radio based around sports, or just sit on social media, X, Blue Sky, Instagram, whatever, for longer than 5 minutes, you run into somebody talking about the latest controversy in the NFL, in the NBA. There's this rolling conversation that scoops up millions of eyeballs and millions of ears around the sports that it's not necessarily just about who had a double-double or a triple-double or who scored the touchdown. It's sort of this other thing. It's the drama of it, right?
Mm.
It's the pro wrestling elements of sports. And MLS has always lacked this. I mean, MLS has always come up short, and we've tried to manufacture, I don't mean make up things. I mean, like, we've tried to force the issue covering these things. Like, we can go back to Sean Francis and the offside rules and things like that. People will remember. Some
Yeah.
people are old enough to remember, Alexander. And I don't know, like, that's the thing that is frustrating me. And sometimes I just think we're past that point. The window is closed because the world has evolved and changed in a way from a media consumption perspective that we just can't do that. So I'm just curious.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I necessarily agree. I think that discussion points are discussion points, and people, part of the joy of being a sports fan, and especially of being a soccer fan, is that you get to be in all these conversations around things that might not have anything to do with the play on the field. I mean, how many times have we talked about, I don't know, the job security of the Man United coach of the moment, just to pull something crazy, like, I don't know. It's so tough to choose a specific example because these moments and these discussions are happening all the time. Was it a penalty? Was it not a penalty? How about that handball call? These are all things that people are talking about all the time in soccer, in the United States too, by the way. And I just don't see those conversations happening around MLS moments. And this seemed like a moment that where it could have happened to a degree. Like, is it the biggest call in the entire world? No, it was the first goal. It was the first goal of a 3-0 game. Miami completely deserved to lose that game. They were generally very bad. But it is a moment that the most famous player, once again, pointed out specifically, where he rarely talks. So, like, this to me is like screaming a golden opportunity, and it was sort of left for other people to do. And there's limited reach that we have compared with, again, the league's official only exclusive broadcaster.
Yeah, it's a really tough situation. It doesn't feel like there's an easy answer to any of this, but I love these conversations. I know that's not everybody's favorite
Little inside
thing.
baseball, but hey.
Yeah, no, it is. But again, I think all of it, like, if you just want to engage with the game on the field and watch the games, that is possible. It's just that I feel like we're missing something around MLS in particular, and the league's been so at such a fevered pace to add clubs and build stadiums and doing good things like that there's this issue where we're missing part of what makes sports interesting, right? I don't need Marcus Rashford on a bender kind of story, but that's the thing, Alexander. Those stories are part of the culture, and you don't wish for negative stories to come out.
Yeah.
Right. But we know that that's the kind of thing that sells, right?
Yeah. Well, and I will also say, it's not as if these stories don't exist and that they're not being done, and it's not as if these conversations aren't being had. It's just not on mainstream sports channels. The MLS made a decision that they're basically, outside of having like one game a week on FS1, they're not going to be on the main mainstream sports channels. So as a result, we have what is becoming, I think, a pretty well-developed independent scene of coverage that includes, podcasts, YouTube shows like you guys. I think Total Soccer Show does a great job. Scuffed. Then you have independent sites. You have Backheeled. You have American Soccer Analysis. You have local sites like 615 Soccer in Nashville just got started. Scarves and Spikes. I could, I really am not trying. Sounder at Heart. These places exist, and these conversations happen. It's just they're not happening in the same rooms where the quote unquote big leagues are happening.
Maybe that is not something we need to be upset isn't going. I mean, again, maybe my lament is misplaced. And I'm willing to admit that there's a different Major League Soccer is operating in a different system, like on a different kind of schematic than those old leagues that, again, before media became what it is today, were operating and becoming parts of their communities, and then maybe over time all of this stuff happens. Anyway, it's not a conversation that has a great endpoint, so I'm going to finish it off. Alexander Abnos, again, go read the story if you are so inclined at The Guardian. Support Alexander's writing at The Guardian as well. Thank you, Alexander, for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, Alexander Avdos talking about media coverage and storylines and controversy and all that stuff. I'm fascinated by that. We're going to ask, I'm going to ask for your support here on Morning Kick Around. If you like the show, you want us to keep going, become a member on YouTube, subscribe, at least subscribe, become a member if you'd like. You get access to the Discord, you get priority comment status, so a bunch of other stuff as well. You can also throw us a little bit of money on ko-fi.com/morning kick around if you want to support us there. That's a great way to help us grow as a channel, add more things, do more shows, get more content out to you rather. You can also follow us on social media at Kick Around, Blue Sky, Instagram, X, those kinds of places. You can send us an email. I didn't mention this earlier, but if you want to send us an old-fashioned email, you can do that at morningkickaround@gmail.com. Let us know things you want us to talk about. Maybe string together all the comments you had on a particular topic because you didn't like what we were talking about, and then I'll read those in one place. That's a great way to do that. All right, let's pause for a moment. When we come back, news out of Mexico that there is a lawsuit over promotion and relegation. So the big question is, Mexican pro rel going to have some sort of impact on American soccer? Stick around. All right, big question here on a Wednesday morning kick around. Saw a story from The Guardian, and friend of the show, Felipe Cardenas, a friend of mine, Felipe Cardenas, there is a lawsuit that has popped up in Mexico. The teams in the second division of Mexican football are suing Liga MX and the FMF over pro rel not coming back, at least not currently planned to come back, for next season, 2025-26. You have the Apertura in the fall and the Clausura in the early part of 2026. And this is all kind of comes out of a pause in pro rel that was instituted by the FMF around COVID. There was a plan to bring back pro rel, or at least the idea was to bring back pro rel by like 5 years, 6 years. I'm sorry, 6-year pause, which the second division clubs believe ends on June 7th, which would mean pro rel has to come back this next season. Now, the FMF is saying, actually, we don't count that first part. We think that it comes back in 2026-27. But as a spokesman told Felipe Cardenas, they do not have any formalized plans, nor have any decisions been made. An FMF spokesperson told The Athletic on Tuesday that promotion relegation should be back in 2026-27, but that no decisions have been formalized. After this article was published, and Felipe went back and added to this, in regard to the article published this Tuesday, May 20th on The Athletic, we inform that the FMF has not been notified of any proceedings against the organization by the Court of Arbitration for Sport, which is where this lawsuit has been filed by 10 second division clubs claiming that the pro rel system needs to be reinstituted. Now, we talked about pro rel a bit in Mexico with Cesar Hernandez on a different episode of Morning Kick Around. If you have not watched my interview with Cesar Hernandez, you can go watch that. We kind of get into the status of pro rel. But the thing that came through Cesar, who covers the league, right, who covers Mexican football, even he was uncertain about what the future of pro rel was going to be in Mexico. It was like, again, this is because the messaging has been so unclear. There's really no accountability at the FMF and Liga MX level as to whether or not pro rel would be coming back. And so these 10 second division teams have taken steps to go to the Court of Arbitration for Sport in order to push the issue. Mexican football sort of rife with conflicts of interest and all kinds of stuff. I mean, remember, this is why Club Leon was kicked out of the Club World Cup, because of multi-club ownership with Grupo Pachuca, who owns a couple of different teams. You look at organizations like Televisa, who have television interest and team interests in Mexican football. And what's fascinating about this story, in another part of this article from Felipe Cardenas, is that it seems to be right there at the tension point between leagues that would prefer to get rid of promotion and relegation because it would stabilize their top division. And obviously, when you look at, remember we talked about club valuations. The Sportico Top 50 included 19 MLS clubs. And we all saw that the revenue numbers didn't seem to match up with those valuations when compared to European clubs that were valued less than those MLS teams. But so much of that comes down to there being no possibility of relegation for those MLS teams. Now, in certain leagues, there are clubs that you will never expect to be relegated, and maybe that creates some sort of safety net that pushes their value. Real Madrid's never going down to the second league in Spain. It's just not going to happen. But for everybody else, or for a lot of those clubs, their valuation is depressed by the fact that it could be relegated. And obviously that means a drop in revenue and television and maybe even fan interest and that kind of thing. In some places, fans will still show up, but maybe you're charging less for tickets, all of that. So there are plenty of people around world football. And this is obviously, I think, for a lot of us, pushes back against the very essence of the game. But there are a lot of people in world football that would prefer that there be no promotion or relegation. And when you look at things like the Super League, which is not dead yet, maybe it's on life support. We talked about that crazy plan. Some group out of Europe wanted to do some platform and relaunch the Super League under some other, what was it, Unify League or something like that? All of this is this idea that we should move on from promotion and relegation, that the clubs that are the big clubs now should be established as the big clubs. In Felipe's piece, it says the claim says that the FMF has violated an established statute that recognizes the automatic right to promotion for Liga Expansión MX clubs and the corresponding obligation to Liga MX to relegation. And by the way, they're talking about one club going up and one club going down. Right? The lawsuit, there's even a mention here of like, what are they even talking about? It's one club. This is not like Germany, France, England, where you have multiple clubs. Actually, here it is. The attorney for the second division clubs is Eduardo Corlezo, and he writes, the clubs are fighting to improve the system as a whole and to provide basic rights for all clubs across the country. It is absurd and nonsensical to oppose the return of promotion and relegation to Mexican football. Only one club would be promoted and one relegated. In Brazil, for example, 4 clubs are promoted and relegated every year. In Spain, Italy, France, and England, 3 clubs are relegated. And so we're not even talking about a major hit, and yet it does seem as though the FMF and Liga MX are pushing back against this. And there's a further quote in Felipe's piece. Even though Mexico has a history with promotion and relegation, we're thinking about future U.S. investment in Mexican football. This is a quote from Miguel Angel Gil. He said this in April at the 2025 LATAM Sports Summit in Mexico. Gil is the CEO of Atletico Madrid. Mexican club Atletico San Luis is an affiliate of Atletico Madrid. So here you have a CEO from a Spanish club that plays in a league. Well, Atleti's probably never going down, or at least it's really hard to imagine them going down. Plays in a league that has promotion and relegation in Spain, talking about an affiliate club or the league that affiliate club plays in Mexico, and saying we might want to move to a closed system because it would benefit the league in terms of U.S. investment. Right? This is again sort of the trend towards the corporate side, the big time investment, these clubs no longer being representatives of their communities, no longer just being about, hey, we are here for the people of San Luis. We're going to represent San Luis. Now it's, well, is San Luis a proper investment vehicle for some firm that wants to put money in? And guess what? They might be scared off if there's a chance that Atletico San Luis goes down. Quote, I would respect the majority, but if we view Mexico as being closely linked to the U.S. in terms of branding and investments, it makes sense to remove relegation, Hill said. From a selfish point of view, I'm very happy that there is no relegation, and if I have to vote, I'd vote in that direction. Here's a quote from Armando Martinez, president of Pachuca. Honestly, I don't see how Liga Expansión teams will be able to build a competitive team and the infrastructure that's needed to compete in the first division. Very bluntly saying that there are no teams that can even meet a standard to play in the first division. But again, this is a situation created largely by the people at the top of the pyramid who are saying, no, you can't play with us, and we're going to push you back down, and you don't have the possibility of promotion, which makes your club less attractive to players and to sponsors and to people in the community. I'm going to take a look at a couple of the comments here as we kind of work our way towards the end of this. Again, I don't know what this means for American soccer. Right, we've talked a lot about what the USL is planning to do. They seem to be moving in a pro-rail direction, but again, strategically doing it and doing it within their particular USL structure. It's not something that will leak out and become an integrated American soccer pyramid. Again, partly because of the way the laws work in our country. These are individual businesses. It's a league-first country, not a club-first country. Let's see. Ian says, I hope they win the lawsuit. Pro-rail for all. Kate says, Pro-rail almost killed Liga MX. That's why they have Liga MX and Liga MX Expansión. Pro-rail, yeah, again, this is part of the problem, right? On the surface, the idea of promotion relegation appeals. It only seems right, just, fair, that a club that is not good enough gets sent down, and a club that wins their league in the second division comes up. But when you have some of the structural problems and financial issues, funding issues, ownership issues that you have in Liga MX, and I'm being very general here, there's some specific things we could talk about. And again, go listen to that interview with Cesar Hernandez. It becomes a question of whether or not promotion and relegation is good for the game writ large. Not because you're protecting the rich people at the top, not just doing that, but because it could potentially cause problems that cascade into your top division. KP, hasn't Mexico had pro-rail for decades? How has it almost killed Liga MX? Again, responding to K. They did have pro-rail for decades. And then again, there were lots of issues with ownership that was not committed, didn't have the funding, did not have the money. I mean, this is the same kind of issues that have affected lower division soccer in America. So again, the problem is we don't trust anybody from a leadership position because they're beholden to the big money interests. And if you ask the CEO of Atletico Madrid, who has an interest in Athletic San Luis, he would prefer to kill off promotion and relegation. Doesn't want relegation. The owner of Pachuca, the president of Pachuca is saying, they can't do it anyway. So why would we even bother it? We may dive further into this topic. Mexican football is a labyrinth and tough to understand. We need to get more experts on this. Aaron, one of our members, shout out to Aaron, become a member. This is fascinating, makes so much sense given how corporate ownership of clubs has taken over other leagues that they would now look at the MLS model. And you could certainly view this as MLS setting a trend or MLS being an example that other leagues want to follow. But I think this all was going to happen anyway, right? MLS just happens to exist as a closed league that was originally conceived as a closed league because there weren't enough clubs or they didn't think it was a good idea back in 96. And yes, MLS could have opened things up, chose not to because they got very comfortable and they've been able to grow at some decent clip since launching the league. MLS is the biggest and most visible closed league in world football. But trust me when I say everybody wants to do this. Outside of the clubs that would be in a position to be promoted, if you gave every club in the Premier League right now, I mean, obviously we've had 3 teams relegated. We've got 3 teams coming up, got a promotion final coming up, all those things. I guess once you establish what next year's field looks like, if you gave every one of those teams a vote to close down relegation to the championship, they'd take it. Of course they would. Of course they would. Even the ones that are not necessarily thinking in investment terms. Even the clubs that are relatively locally controlled and focused and true clubs in that sense, they would love it. They would lock in their Premier League status. But it would change the complexion of the game completely. And so this is something Mexico now is going to have to deal with here. We'll see what this lawsuit does. I want to thank Alexander Abnos for coming on the show. Again, remind you that you can support us, become a member on YouTube. It's a great way to do it. Subscribe to the channel on YouTube if you have not already subscribed. And again, the very best thing you can do, right? Absolutely, we would love to have you become a member, support the show that way financially. But the absolute best thing you can do is tell somebody about Morning Kick Around, share something that we've talked about today, share a clip, share a piece of the show, share a link to the YouTube channel, push it out there, tell a friend locally in your soccer community, let them know that we're talking about all these American soccer stories. that is the best way to support the show. I say, and leave us a rating and a review wherever you do that. That's a thing as well. If you get us on a podcast, I forgot to mention we're a podcast. You can find us on Spotify. Going to Spotify and subscribing and watching the show and listening to the show on Spotify is also a great way to support us financially. And if you already have Spotify, you don't got to do nothing. Just go watch the show, support the show there. Shout out to Rob Kerr, who's on the road with Oakland County. Couldn't be here today. Really good to have him back on Friday when we'll do another show. So until then, I'll say what Rob always says, enjoy your football.